Thank you very much.
Gents, again, coming to answers that you gave on notice to the last estimates and following up on NASAG, one of the questions I asked was, do you consider that the airspace and noise considerations are all that's required to safeguard airports? Your answer was yes. Are you aware of the ATSB report into engine failures or degradation of power after takeoff?
Is there a specific? I'm not aware of a
specific report. I'd like you to look into it on notice. I'd like you to come back to me and tell me whether you think the recommendations in that report about the requirement for forced landing areas for aircraft, given that they are the only options that pilots, and there's some 240 odd incidents leading up to the 31st December of 2010, in the decade before that, of degradations that were forced landings and 75 engine failures. I'd like you to revisit the discussion on public safety areas that has been pushed off to a later date, and I'd like your response to that on notice to whether it's adequate.
Certainly, Senator. I will do that.
Secondly, in terms of Adelaide, the efficacy of the NASAG process, I asked the question, if a request to extend building heights was put forward, how would that be handled? And the response back was, there is no request. If you look at the front page of the Adelaide Advertiser, going back to February this year, strong push there to get rid of what they call archaic limitations on building heights. Some talk of 100-storey building. And if you're familiar with the layout of airports in Adelaide, that's a huge impact. I'd like your written answer as to how you will handle that request when it inevitably comes. Thirdly, I asked about the investment in leased airports into aviation infrastructure during the briefing your staff gave. You talked about the percentages, and quite high percentages in some case, of figures. Going to Jandakot as an example, the figure is in the tens of millions allocated against airport. Parliamentary Library, the best they can find is water supply, sewerage, drainage, electricity supply, gas, communication systems and existing interests. No mention of runways, taxiways, aircraft run-up areas, additional runways that have been on the books for ages. What oversight does your department have on the implementation of the undertaking that these lessees have to invest the money they make in aviation-related infrastructure?
John, do you want to start?
Senator, I'm not sure that there is a general obligation on us to do that level. When the sale agreements were set up for the initial privatisation of the airports, a number of the airports did have obligations in relation to particular developments. Those were discharged within the time frame for those obligations. So we don't, as a rule, have a process of keeping an account of the individual investment.
Okay, Mr. Doherty, thank you. Can I ask you to take on notice then, given that we're running out of time rapidly, can you come back to me with how the department will implement your stated vision from the white paper and your response to me that airports are predominantly about aviation? How will you actually achieve that vision statement for your department's view of airports if you do not monitor the investment and the upkeep? Can I ask you to also extend that to ALOP aerodromes, particularly given that the transfer deed specifically prohibited local government from doing things like building dams or things that might attract bird life? And right at the moment, there are a number of councils who are doing things like interrupting drainage, creating birds, building dams right next to runways. I'd like your detailed explanation about how you will maintain oversight of aviation infrastructure that is clearly degrading at both the leased airports and within the ALOP space.
Certainly, Senator. I think Mr. Doherty was talking about specific development commitments, but we'll come back to you with a statement in relation to how we oversight those. And as I said, ALOP, as we've discussed, is largely a matter for local government, and the guidelines under NASAG try to deal with some of those issues you've raised. So we'll come back to you with a detailed answer.
Thank you, Mr. Mrdak.
And sorry, Chair, can I just finish one thing there?
One very, very quick one, otherwise I will...
You've made the comment that it's a matter for local government. I'll give you a list on notice of issues that I'd like you to actually address one by one as to whether you think local government have actually done a credible job in preserving aviation infrastructure, even the leased airports. Jandakot.
Okay, Senator Fawcett, you've made your point and put it on notice. Thank
Okay.
you.